Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fandomology, where fandoms collide. And this is going to be this isn't even really a beginner series. That's why I call it not quite beginner series, because we're definitely going to go a little bit deeper than beginner type levels. But this is kind of a spin off of the history beginner series that me and Nate here did with Phil. And we decided that we want to focus on a very specific type of history, that being, of course, music history. And of course, myself and Nate are music nerds. I come from the more not orchestral slash marching side of music. He comes from the marching slash orchestral side of things. And so we're going to get into that and just in general nerd out about music and where music started and how musical instruments have evolved. And yeah, it's going to be quite the thing to get into. So we're going to start here, Nate. You brought this up when we first brought up this idea. Is where did music truly start? Was it with the voice or with banging on a rock or something? Was it is it who what's the older instrument, the voice or percussion?
To be honest, you can probably argue either one. I know you're a little bit more on the side of percussion being actually the older musical family, while I'm on the side of it's very ambiguous because
Okay.
technically speaking, a grunt or a
Hmm.
is a musical sound, and I have been asked to do various things like that in
Yeah,
pieces of music, but also that is another very old former, a stomp.
exactly. So music history really is intertwined with human history because the moment that humans, and this is going off of whatever version of human origin that you believe in, whether it's creation, evolution, what have you, the moment that humans began communicating in some way with one another, music was pretty much invented right then and there, be it with those vocal grunts or with the sound of a. And also, I want to real quick say hello to Leia Rose. Thanks for joining. And of course, hello to Trent from uh, TDK. Thanks for joining. So from there, it became sort of a way to evolve those either vocal sounds we were making or how to create other sounds that could be used to convey something, because that's ultimately what music is. Music is in and of itself a form of communication meant to convey any form of message or emotion, right?
Yes, and you could yeah, and really that's kind of where some of the oldest forms of, especially me with having the background in percussion, of course, we can tell by the fancy dime a
Mm-hmm.
dozen worn out Zildjian hat. It comes from the idea of communicating with folks. Like, how do you sit there and either convey a story or how do you convey, hey, I'm over here?
Thank you, Trent. Carson says, "Get wrecked, scrub." I will make sure next time I do a gaming stream, I will make sure to play that clip for him. I don't have it logged into StreamYard though, but you were saying?
So, yeah, like I was kind of saying there, music really is one of the earliest forms of communication, whether it's passing on a story through generations. I mean, think about how many great legends and heroes we know through the idea of song, especially if we follow that idea of a Nordic tradition. And
Right.
then say we follow it from the military stance. You
Mhm.
yourself, you spend some time playing trumpet. Uh, one of the most famous pieces for trumpet is a bugle call that signals end of the workday and has also at times been used to signify the passing of a
Taps.
service member.
Right.
And there are plenty of other calls. In fact, probably one of my favorite, at this point, it's percussion exercise, is an old piece called Three Camps. That's
Mhm.
the bugler's equivalent or the drummer's equivalent to the bugle call reveille.
Okay. Real quick question. Do you happen to have your practice pad near you?
Let me hold on one second. I'm going to mute my.
Okay, so while Nate gets his practice pad, of course, we're going to want him to demonstrate some of his percussion stuff. I've got my guitar here, so I'll demonstrate some stuff with that. I do not have a trumpet anymore, unfortunately. But yes, music has always been a form of communication, just like normal spoken word, normal talking. And the evolution of music has been in sort of service to that idea of how best through music can I convey what it is that I want to convey to you. Like certain chord progressions, we'll say, have been used throughout time to convey different emotions. Like I'm going to just grab my guitar here and I'm just going to make something up here. We're going to use, so I'm just going to do 3 chords and I'm going to show you how I can make these chords sound happy and sad. Virginia says, "Did you get the kinks worked out?" I hope so. This is literally my first time playing guitar through this mic. But for example, here's a way that you can take just 3 simple chords and sound either happy, but if you make 2 of those a minor chord, and this is kind of where we get into a little bit of music theory, you can make them sound sad. You see how the first set of chords, if that came through all the way, see how the first set of chords sounded more happy and uplifting, where the second set sounded more sad? That's basically what that is. Virginia says fades in and out, but it isn't the worst it's ever been. Okay, fair enough. So again, music can convey different emotions, and the evolution of music has been in service to how best can we convey this message or this emotion. Because you go back to the times of the caveman, like we're saying, those guttural grunts and the just random like hitting on a rock or clapping their hands together. They had ways of communicating that through that. I don't know how to demonstrate that. That's more Nate's department. But I'm sure they had ways of manipulating their voice to sound happy through these grunts that they were doing. Same thing with the primitive percussion. And then, of course, you go on through history, and at some point, someone finds a piece of string at tension and just plucks it. And that starts ultimately the strand of evolution to where we get stringed instruments, such as my favorite right here. So that's another thing, too. At some point, someone figured out not just can you grunt, not just can you bang on something, but someone also figured out that you can go and you do that through a metal tube, and you've got brass. Is that accurate, Nate?
I guess I don't know. You're the bugler here, not me.
Okay, and I see what you said.
Yeah, although I might be able to do a little something with something that's a 20th century invention.
Okay. Yeah, I get it's coming through a little bit. So for those that are wondering, Nate's got a practice pad in his lab and he's got some brushes there. So so yeah, I was just talking about how different instruments, like where they started. Like I was talking about someone one day figured out, hey, I can pluck this string that's in tension, and that's music right there, which of course evolves all your stringed instruments, such as the one I'm holding here. Someone, like I said, went one day and decided to do that through a tube, and they got a brass sound. And then someone blew into a reed, and that's how you got your primitive woodwinds.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Although the brass wind stuff did come about a little bit later on in history, because really we have to get to the Bronze Age first.
Exactly.
Though there were some other instruments made of some early metals. I actually just recently, while I was going back through having some of my archives information, came across a BBC documentary, and it was talking up there way up north in Europe about some old musical instruments that, ironically, if you were to look at them today, you would think they look like a modern sousaphone.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know much of what they would have been used for, whether they were like what most early percussion was used for as an intimidation tack against an enemy, whether it was truly used for communication or just entertainment storytelling, providing something
Right.
to the auditory senses.
Which, speaking of intimidation tactics, that's where we get our symbols from. That's what you said once. In
Yes,
fact,
from
what isn't
everything.
the brand on your hat there? Ain't they the oldest?
They are the oldest manufacturer still in production, to my understanding. The company itself is over 400 years old and actually originated out of the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
The company only came to the States in the 1920s. I believe here in about 2 years they're going to be celebrating a century in the States. Though at one time, the company was a Constantinople division as well as an American division. That's where you got your Zildjian Ks and your Zildjian As for our drummers out there. And
Okay.
then eventually, there was a uh, change in philosophy amongst some of the family that owned the business, and apparently that splintered off into another company that we call Sabian.
I know. I've heard of them, but yeah, every single musical instrument has its origin point somewhere, because someone just went like, oh hey, doing this one random thing sounds good, let's do it over and over again, and how can we make it sound better?
Yeah. And it can also be used in a way that it sounds terrifying. Let's use to scare the crap out of our enemies.
Exactly. And that's also where you start, as language develops, that's where you start getting things like war chants and cadences. Like, everyone, of course, knows about the classic military cadences of left, right, 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 left, right, and all that stuff. There's multiple different purposes to that. Number one, it's to keep everyone in step, but number two, it's also a morale thing. Because for what other purpose would you sing? They say that in the army, the chow is mighty fine, and then everyone echoes back, and then they say something terrible. Or they say that in the Navy, the pay is mighty fine. They give you $100, they take back 99.
I could get political with that one.
I know you could, but also, again, stuff like that is also an intimidation tactic, and not just cadence. There's also things like the Haka dance from the Pacific Islands. That is an intimidation tactic right there.
Yes, it very much is, and that kind of does lead into the way that kind of how music evolved in other ways is really dance became a major thing, especially once we start getting into closer to the modern day.
Exactly. And Trent, I see what you say here, but I'm not pulling that up. But anyways, let's see. And of course, with all of the different methods of creating music, and of course the different evolutions of music, human creativity is literally boundless. And so everyone was like, okay, what can I do with these different sounds? How can I organize them? And then how can I make them fit to perfectly portray what it is that I've got going on in here. And that's how we start getting like our 7-note scales of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the sharps and flats between all the minors, diminishes, all the stuff like that. Because people were trying to get that sound. That's ultimately what music is, getting a sound that's in your head out of your head through some form of creative expression, be it with your voice or with some form of tool. So that's where you get like the earliest examples of, say, classical music, which is kind of where concert band for high school and stuff like that comes from, which of course we both have experience in. So let me ask you this one, Nate. I don't know if you know the answer to this one. Who was, in your opinion, the first classical composer?
Oh, first classical composer. Ironically, me going back to this BBC documentary, it's kind of made me rethink, because there is truly what they called the classical period even back then. So you could probably name any number of composers from that era. Let me just do a
Right.
quick wiki search real quick.
And while he does that, Trent, does mayonnaise count as an instrument? This isn't SpongeBob.
Actually, I do have a horse in that fight. It
Oh,
does qualify, technically speaking. It's the jar when you hit it with
true.
sticks.
It's percussion.
Yeah, and I guess in theory, if you were to hit the mayonnaise with a stick itself, it would make a ploop sound. So I guess you could use that.
Okay.
Take it for what you want.
Well, did you find what you were looking for?
Not yet.
Okay. So, of course, the military also decides, hey, we like this classical music thing. Let's see if we can use that for our own purposes and use that to help the troops stay in step, and that's how you get the military marches. And from there, of course, you get derivatives of that going down as far as like high school marching bands, for example. Something, again, that the two of us both have experience with.
I have a little bit more experience with, though. Scary amount.
Yes, you do. And I'm happy to let you have that credit over me. Yeah, I
can
didn't
dance.
like concert band when I was in school. Or at
I had to
least
figure out.
I liked it at first, but I grew to not like it because of just who I was doing with. Virginia says, Paul, can one of you demonstrate how to play a scale on mayonnaise or whatever the percussion equivalence is? Yeah, he's just doing rudiments. Meanwhile, on something a little bit more melodic, a scale is something like this. I got to practice my scales a little bit, but you get the idea.
So I would say if we're looking at the classical era of music,
Mm-hmm.
before, granted, this is kind of going more in uh, really the classical period does date from the 1730s to early 1800s if we're stretching things.
Okay.
So we're coming out of the Baroque period essentially. It would be Giuliano Antonio Peretti who would be the earliest known one. Uh, Granted, he was alive from roughly the 1650s to the 17 to the or from the 1660s to the 1750s. There we go.
Okay. And it's also, since we're talking about classical music, it's also very important to know too that music history often overlaps and intertwines itself with other facets of history. And of course, who was one of the biggest influences and sort of proprietors of the evolution of the classical genre, but the church. Because a lot of these composers that we know of, like Bach, like Beethoven, like Mozart, and all that, they were composing their pieces for the church. Some of them we still sing today. Like, I know for a fact in my church, we still sing things like joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but we do that one sometimes. And that's a Beethoven piece. In
Yeah.
fact, if I'm not mistaken, and I apologize for mentioning this to those that work at Luray Caverns, but the music to A Mighty Fortress Is Our God was written by Beethoven, right? Martin Luther just added the lyrics to it.
There is arguments whether or not he did, or whether or not it's an adaptation based upon other works that were done by Beethoven, or whether it was a completely original thing. Unfortunately, Martin Luther's not alive today to go sit there and be like, "Hey, bro, where'd you get the idea for that melody from?" And really, to kind of get, we've actually transitioned a lot kind of from that idea of these early horns and very early string instruments, as well as just these grunts and things. We kind of skipped over how really the Roman Empire is probably one of the more early areas where we can start to see inklings of music today involved with things.
Right.
And of course, you have the chanteurs, which eventually, as Rome goes from a, what is the term? Polytheological, I think is the term for if you have multiple deities.
Or paganism, you could say.
Yeah. And as they become a Christian society, you then see the church start to take in some more of these ideas of music with what
Mm-hmm.
we eventually come to know as the Gregorian chant.
Right, which if you haven't listened to some of those, even if you're not religious, definitely do it if you want to see just how melodic and how pristine the human voice can sound. Especially when you consider that this type of music has been used in other things too, like the Halo soundtrack, for example.
That does take influences from that idea. But what I found very interesting when looking at this, kind of going back and dusting up on all of this, it wasn't until actually surprisingly past the fall, after the fall of Rome, that you start to get this idea of even having two voices simultaneously singing the same piece of music.
Yes.
Granted, they were doing it a P1, P8 interval, or an octave for our more musically inclined folks.
Tret says heathens. That's what you call them. The best Gregorian chant comes from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. You're the one that's the heathen, Trent. The best is Halo.
I mean, to be fair, the British do have a lot more history involved with that, and being that Monty Python is a British comedy troupe, it's arguable. I won't say which
True.
side I lean to, but
Also, if y'all are wondering what I'm laughing at, Virginia's messaging me different things to try and get me to laugh on stream, and so far she's doing a good job.
he's playing on his phone. It's supposed to be working. Can you believe that?
But anyways, though, that's another thing that you brought up too, Nate, is where we started to learn harmonies, which let's see if I can demonstrate that with this. Like, that's kind of the best that I can do to demonstrate harmonies. But you've got the root note, and then you've got the complementary notes either below or above it. that together make a chord, and
Yes.
that's basically harmonies.
And ironically, when we get to those harmonies out, it takes quite a bit longer to get those harmonies outside of an octave. You finally sit there and get the development into using the P4 and the P5, or perfect fourth, perfect fifth, because they were said to kind of have a semi-religious idea because of just how well they matched up with things.
Right. And of course, it's well worth noting that Christianity is not the only religion that has contributed to the furtherance of music evolution and music history. There's of course other religions that are known for using music in their practices. Like for example, the Islamic call to prayer is basically a song. And of course, if anyone of that faith is watching that wants to give further insight into that, feel free to in the chat. But to sum it up in a sentence, it is basically a song.
I don't disagree. Granted, I'm not as well versed on other religions, especially when it comes to music involved with their religious practices.
Of
But
course.
yeah, and especially with Islam and Judaism being both very heavily related cousins to Christians.
Hmm.
Historically, as to be said, they're typically all three referred to as the Abrahamic religions.
You
You
want to know
will see
something
these
funny, Nate?
influences.
You want to know something
Yes.
funny? Me and Trevor were talking about this exact thing earlier on follow through. In regards to his book idea, though.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyways, I brought that up just to say that it's not just Christianity. Religion as a whole has all religions have contributed something to music. Even the more primitive religions, like for example, the Native American religions and their flutes and all that, as they have different songs that they would play for different things. Like I remember one time, probably the older folks watching this will remember this, but does anyone remember the show Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman? It was one of my mom's favorite TV shows, and um she would watch it. She would rent the DVDs of it from Netflix. But remember when you get Netflix DVDs in the mail? You're welcome for feeling old. But she would get those DVDs from Netflix in the mail and watch them. And I remember um there's this one character who was Native American. I forget what his name is, but he was the medicine man for the local tribe out in Colorado Springs. And there's this one scene of him playing his flute for his wife who had just miscarried. And one of the other characters, Sully, his name was, comments saying, "That was your courtship song, wasn't it?" And I know that's kind of there's not much to it than that, but still, the idea that the Native Americans would have different songs for courtship, different songs for war, different songs for funerals, different songs for weddings, things like that.
And really, that's not such a novel idea. That's very much a true idea, especially when we look at both society within religion and then when we look at it more outside of religion. You will almost always sit there and see, even when you look at the idea of opera, that there is certain music played for moments that you're supposed to laugh, and there's other moments where it's supposed to be more of a lament because it's a sad scene.
Exactly. And
And
then
also,
and then of course there's just certain pieces and certain performances that, yes, you're supposed to feel that, but at the same time you just cannot help but feel awed by what it is that you're hearing, that could come from a human voice or from human hands. Like for example, um the famous opera singer Pavarotti. Listen to him sing what's it called, Nessun Dorma, and that is like the epiphany of opera right there. The epitome is what I meant to say. Um, Trent says Phantom of the Opera has both of those.
I haven't seen Phantom of the Opera in quite some time, but I kind of agree based upon what I remember of the opera. But
Do you
also,
want a quick side story, Nate? When I
uh
was
oh,
when I was a freshman in high school, you know how in the LHS band it was always tradition that the seniors got to pick whatever the music was for the spring concert.
yeah.
The seniors of that year picked Phantom of the Opera as one of the songs that we performed. And so it's kind of like a tie-in to that. There's this one random day. This was well after the spring concert, by the way, so we really weren't working on anything, where Sheridan showed us the movie. And
Yeah, I can believe that.
yeah, it was something. And Phil says, "Oh, looky, Paul got a plushie. It is not a Pikachu, though. It is a Slytherin snake. And Virginia got this for me, okay?" And Trent said, "I would have picked Metallica." I don't know that anyone's arranged Metallica for high school concert band. I'm sure someone has now, but back in those days,
J.W.
I,
Pepper probably has something out there. I could
yeah.
almost bet.
And it would have probably been like one of Metallica's ballads, for example, Fade to Black or Nothing Else Matters. I do not see them adapt. I don't see them adapting for high school level something like Master of Puppets or Battery.
Oh, I could see it. I could see it now.
Yeah. Also, Phil says, "Nate, do you want a plushie too?"
Um, well, what I want probably not a good idea to show on stream or talk about on
Yeah.
stream because YouTube
He
moderators don't like certain things that I like.
and Blazerhawk
Um,
Darren says, "Careful that you don't get deceived by that snake." Yeah, Nate likes, let's just say, cordless hole punchers.
I was gonna go with the ultimate iteration of long range percussion, but okay.
Yes. Let's talk about that for a second. We're kind of just going all over the place with this music history stream, but let's talk about the time that a guy took a cannon and made it a musical instrument.
Yes, the Russian composer has famously used it in the overture, 1812 overture, which was kind of talking about.
Uh, Nate has a little pokey thing that he could stick on the end of a hole puncher that we kind of saw the other night with the event that shall not be discussed again.
Where was I with the train of thought? Oh yes, Russian composers.
Tchaikovsky, if I even said that right.
That sounds right. Ironically, he's probably one of the most influential and most talked about Russian composers. Um, he was actually writing this. Uh, Really, it's an episodic piece of something like 20 minutes, I think, or 25 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's supposed to tell the story of the Russian defense of Moscow from French forces in 1812. And
I
that's
did
one of
not
the
know
reasons
this actually.
you had not heard that? That's the origin story of why it's called 1812 Overture.
I thought it
And
had to do with the American versus British conflict.
okay, look, we sit there and say that we've had only two world wars. In reality, you could argue that there's several different world wars.
Yeah.
What about that Christmas song and the whip?
Oh yeah. That the sleigh
Dun, dun,
ride.
dun, 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 dun.
Da 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 da.
Believe it or not, it's very rare that we ever actually use a whip in the way that we traditionally
Yeah,
think of one.
it's basically a piece of wood. There it goes, like something. Yeah.
Yeah. But also to kind of go on to or back to that canon idea, I believe it was Beethoven also Who was one of the other classical composers? And the sad part is now it's going to bug me that I can't think of his name. Hold on, wait. I think I thought of the song that it actually is.
The
Da-da-da-da.
point the point of this, folks, is to prove that you can also use percussion as weapons. Not just scare tactics, weapons. So those of you guys that are pro 2A, you've got some percussion instruments in your safes.
Believe it or not, I think he's a YouTuber and TikToker, gun drummer. We've probably all seen the video at least once. I believe he does a cover of some heavy metal.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so it was Beethoven. I was right. But Ode to Joy, if I'm not mistaken, actually has some canon pieces towards the finale.
I didn't know that. By the
In
way,
some versions.
Virginia, remind me to ask Dad next time we do that song in church if we can bring some cannons. Nate, you're going to furnish the cannons.
I don't own cannons.
Yet.
I mean, they are legal for black
They
powder.
are. And they are not an NFA item either.
Though I will sit there and need.
Captain America uses a glorified symbol as a frisbee and shield. I mean, it's an oversimplification, but yes. So, continuing on, though, eventually people kind of talking about the evolution of styles of music, eventually people get tired of classical, and then the next big thing happens being jazz.
If I'm not. Jazz is actually a uniquely American thing, and to be honest, that kind of comes out of a completely different outcropping, and really we kind of haven't went into where that comes from.
Wait,
That
hold on. I just realized there was actually something I skipped over. Barroom music. Like barrelhouse pianos and type stuff.
and really kind of we got to get before that, which of course I think you're alluding to the idea of minstrels and other songs
Mhm.
like that, is we've got to look at the idea that what are these songs of work. I
Mhm.
mean, sea
The
shanties are probably
sea
some of the most
shanties.
famous.
I
Way
mean,
head up she rises,
hold
way
on.
head up she
We got
rises,
to do it
way
right.
head up
We
she
got
rises early in the morning.
we got to do it right. What should we do with the drunken tour guide? What should we do with the drunken tour guide? What should we do with the drunken tour guide early in the morning?
I thought we said we weren't going to use that one, but okay.
Lock him in the office of Tammy Sullivan. Lock him in the.
Let's maybe not
Okay.
say that part.
Yeah, you're right. All right.
Uh,
For legal reasons, this is a joke.
so, what is a menstrual? Probably one of the most famous menstruals to have ever graced an American's ears is da-da-da-da, Dixie, to put
Mm-hmm.
it lightly. A lot of times these were, at least the tunes themselves, happen to have been of folk or African American origin, and they, in some ways, are an outcropping of that in early forms of blues along with traditional folk songs. And
Yeah.
I'm talking like last 250 years.
So, and of course, this is how you get stories. Because I remember watching a TikTok video recently from this guy that's like an expert on all things Robin Hood. And he said that like the earliest iterations of the Robin Hood stories were put forth in song, and likely minstrels was how that was done, or just in general bards.
Yes. And ironically, bards, in terms of them just going around playing music, is a much more modern thing than we think of in history. Like, we think of it being medieval, but kind of the way I understand it, it's more late medieval to early Renaissance. And
Mm-hmm.
strangely enough, some of the first traveling musicians that kind of we think of as the early idea of bards actually come from Islamic Spain, is my
Really?
understanding. That's
Hmm.
what I've heard and what I've read a few times. Now, granted, I don't know, Phil might know more about that. If he does, please chime in, considering I see he's in the chat.
He is, but he's, I guess, lurking right now. Also, Trent highlights a fantasy version of a bard. There you go.
Yes.
So, anyways, so yeah, there's just different, just in general, there's different ways that music has evolved to not just convey different messages, but also to fit the times. Because as times change and as people's tastes evolve, people are going to want to see if they can take music in new and different directions. And music, we already said that music is one of those things where you do it to convey some form of message or emotion. And music is also used to be a rallying cry and be a form of protest also. And one of the most well-known historic ways to do that, of course, was the African American spiritual from, well, they don't like to use the S word, but we'll just say pre 1861 times.
Yeah. And that's very much true. That's where a lot of our modern influences of music ironically come from, like what we would think of today as rock and roll.
Hmm.
Eventually, of course, you get other outcroppings such as rockabilly,
Rockabilly, yeah.
ragtime,
Blues,
blues. Yep.
yeah. And a lot of course, again, songs for the church. Like, I can't verify this, but I have heard people say that this song actually started as a spiritual. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. And I did the whole thing because I know YouTube's not going to take that one down. It's public domain. Also, hello in the chat to Ian. Thanks for joining us. By the way, Ian, what you doing right now? Would you like to get in on this? Because I can shoot you the link real quick.
Yes, 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 yes.
But yeah, African American spirituals was not just music, but they did that to speak code to each other. Like, if I'm not mistaken, there was one called "Steal Away to Jesus." Anytime they sang that one, that meant that there was an escape that was happening soon. And Ian, that's fine, bud. You don't have to you do not have to have your camera on if you don't want to, but if that is up to you. But yeah, there's that one. There was another one I believe called "Wade in the Water," and that was them speaking code of if you wade through the water, the tracking dogs can't get you.
Yep. And there were even some songs that they would sing to, and then even that they would dance to, that they were actually trying to sit there and mock their bosses, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, their bosses didn't think anything of it, and they quite liked watching them dance because they thought it was funny, but little they know they
I
were actually getting
actually,
made fun of.
yeah, I actually didn't know that one. Hmm.
Yeah, that was a little small thing. I think they were, was it like bread or cake parties, pastry parties, something like that? I forget what the term was for it.
Yeah. So let's see, what other big movements have. Oh, of course, another great use of music to convey a message and also protest, Vietnam era protest music. I know we're kind of going out of order with history, but there's a great example. And of course, the most well-known Vietnam protest song that funny enough makes its way into every single Vietnam movie, Fortunate Son by Creedence
Yes.
Clearwater Revival. That is an anti-war song. And yet everyone hears that song and does the meme of, "Oh my god, I'm having a Vietnam flashback," which, come on. Only those that actually fought that.
And there's even people who sit there and there's another very well-known song that identifies with Vietnam, but ironically is about a century older.
What's that?
It's Wagner's Die Valkyrie.
So that's
Dum
the one
da
that goes
dum dum dum
dun 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 dun.
dum
Dun.
dum.
Okay.
Yeah. Although Wagner in his own right is he's a very interesting classical artist to really think about. If you're going to look at him musically, do understand that he is very much kind of a combination of a lot of these other theories that were being popularized at the time. I believe one of the most often individuals that he kind of took inspiration from, let me see if I can find his name. I think it's like Liszt or something. Ironically, as I'm looking at a list of various composers. No. 17. Okay, well, I can't find his name to give it more proper. I'll find it later if I
Right.
remember.
Real quick, Trent lists another example of an anti-war song, Twisted Sisters, We're Not Gonna Take It. Okay, y'all are probably gonna be shocked at this. I have never, at least that I can remember, heard that song all the way through, so I can't verify that.
I've never really paid attention to the words enough to know.
Yeah?
So I
But
can't comment much.
mm-hmm. And then of course the other different things that people have used music to tell about, love songs. People wanted to find a way to say I love you beyond just saying the words I love you. They wanted to put music to it, and that's how we get, of course, songs like, and I'm doing this one on purpose. The person that I sing this to, you know who you are, but it's where we get songs like "You Are My Sunshine, My Only Sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away." That's for one person, and you know who you are.
It's for me.
Sure, why not?
Ironically,
Ooh,
here. Hmm?
real quick, Trent just put something in here that we never considered. Barbershop quartets. Another great example of a group that would sing, that basically just relied on their voice for their instrument, and because of that, perfected vocal harmony like perfectly.
And to be honest, I really haven't studied all too much of where the idea of the barbershop quartet comes from, but I would be curious to see how much of an influence a English practice had on it. Apparently, around the time before the English Civil War, so before we kind of get the idea of the English Empire as we think of it,
Mhm.
it was not uncommon to find essentially a predecessor to a guitar.
Thank you,
Just
Virginia.
yeah, a random predecessor to the guitar just sitting around in a barber shop or surgeon's office in England. That literally you could just go in because you're going to get your beard trimmed or your hair cut or go in for some surgery. Go in and
Mhm.
start playing songs.
That would be the lute, right?
I don't think it's the lute. I think it's kind of something in between.
I gotcha. Well, what it is, I don't know, but yeah, barbershop quartets, they obviously have made their mark on music history. And again, they've arguably, when barbershop quartets mix with Christian music, that's where you get your Southern gospel stuff from. I mean, I'm sure there's more to it than that, but still on a basic level. And then, of course, you've got people making music that don't have access to like big bands, or they don't have the money to afford the best instruments, so they play with what they have, and they happen to be just up in the hills of the countryside, and that's where you get bluegrass music from. So banjos, guitars, mandolins, taking maybe instruments that already exist for other purposes and then playing them in a very simple way that makes you want to shout yeehaw.
Might want to make you
I
shout a few
mean,
other things, but
yeah, but come on, everyone knows this one. I messed it up a little bit, but maybe
that
that's
wasn't
a
the
good
one.
thing. Yeah, dueling
That wasn't the
banjos.
one I was gonna go with. I was gonna go. Down to the river and there shone like gold in the hot morning sun. Oh,
Oh,
however the
that
rest of it goes.
one.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that one really would get us in trouble with YouTube.
Well, it's a good thing I suck at singing on the spot without memorizing the words anymore.
That's all right. Real quick, Trent says, my great grandfather used to tour with the Couriers and the Gatherers when he was young. I have a record with him playing the mandolin and singing with them. Nice.
Heck yeah, man. Heck yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, and we've already been cataloging, we've already been cataloging this a little bit on the channel here, but the evolution of rock and especially heavy metal. Because again, music is all about getting the sounds that you have in your head out through either your voice or a musical instrument. And let's just say that certain people had more heavy, more distorted sounds in their head than others. And so, with not just the help of music, but also electronic engineering through like amps and guitar pedals and such, you start getting more and more distortion, more and more heaviness. People start learning, hey, I can tune my guitar down and get lower notes and add to that distortion and make it sound even heavier. And that's where you get metal music from.
And ironically, on that tuning, I want to bring up a really interesting fact that I just love to talk about. Do you know the Treaty of Versailles? I know historians here are like, which one? The one that ended World War One. So what was that?
Ooh,
1918, 1919.
something like that. I know what you're talking about though.
There was
440.
actually a provision in there to standardize the tuning pitch for concert A. I believe that in the Treaty of Versailles, it stated that it's supposed to be 135 hertz. Ironically, no one listened to that Treaty of Versailles.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that there was a World War II is kind of a dead giveaway, but
Right.
ironically, we would not standardize on the modern 440 hertz concert A pitch until post Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
for American context.
Which is funny because 432 hertz is said to be a more natural, more earthy frequency.
That's when it's referencing the human voice.
Right,
A
because
lot of
that's what we
musical
sing at.
instruments prefer 440 or excuse me 435 hertz.
Okay, but we sing at 432. Or
Hmm.
am I completely off base here?
Or hold on here. I think we have this backwards. The higher frequency does better for the instruments. The lower frequency does better for the humans.
Right.
You know, because
That's
these ancient things here.
hmm That's why a
And
lot
then
of bands, when they play live, especially as they're getting older, will tune their guitars down either a half step or a whole step to accommodate, especially if the singer's getting older, to accommodate his aging vocals. That's why, for example, Megadeth started out playing in standard tuning, but ever since Dave Mustaine started having his vocal issues, they went down a whole step. Same thing with Metallica. James Hetfield is aging. He's getting older. He can't hit all the same notes that he used to be able to. Metallica tuned down half a step.
And strange enough, that was for a lot of things. People would tune things down a half step. In fact, I want to say that there was a famous classical art, what we today consider a classical era artist, or potentially romantic era. He had an issue with was a piano that wouldn't tune right, and he ended up transposing the entire thing a half step and playing it
Wow.
live.
Real quick, Trent says, "Man in the Box, All Along the Watchtower, Van Halen, all of them did those distortions that sound like voices." Yeah, especially Van Halen and Eddie.
Yeah. It's funny. Ironically, as soon as we standardized it in the world, we unstandardized it.
Exactly, because humans are naturally rebellious and don't like to follow rules.
Yeah.
So yeah, music, of course, and then of course there's ways that people learn to make music without actually making notes, and that's of course rapping. That is, I mean, say of it what you will, but it is a musical genre that has its history, and it is a very rich history.
And ironically, there's a very interesting kind of transitional thing that I kind of want to go back to. I guess it's because of my marching background.
Mm-hmm.
Of how did we kind of develop into a lot of the things that we do today? Kind of what brings about some of the unique sounds that are afforded to in a musician's toolkit. Specifically, I'm going to be looking at it from a drummer point of view here.
Mm-hmm.
But we classically think of, especially at the time period of throughout much of the early 1800s on back, as you played the one instrument. That's the only instrument you played. Not
Mm-hmm.
two, not three, not half a dozen, one.
Yes.
Well, around the time period of the 1860s, 1870s, when we're starting to sit there and see these masses of musicians from the Civil War being drawn down, but also still wanting to play music. And then, of course, some of them would go off to do other things. As we know, there was a percussionist involved with Story at Work, who, ironically, he went on to do something entirely different, but yet he was a musician at one point, specifically a drummer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, Now, a lot of these other drummers who were freshly out of the insert side army here, they still wanted to keep up the practice. But there was also fewer drummers available typically at a lot of these things because a lot of these other drummers had to go back and make a living.
Right.
For as much as music is a great thing, it doesn't always pay for the average person to do as a day job.
Sadly.
So they come about, okay, let's start playing two instruments, three instruments at a time. So you get an idea of double drumming. Boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick. This is on the snare, or this is on the old bass drum. This is on the old snare drum.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, double drumming really stayed a thing up until uh, it was the Ludwig company, or one of the Ludwig brothers actually developed the first modern foot pedal that we think of for activating the kick drum on a drum set. Then,
And real quick, and here I thought the Ludwig Drum Company was named after Beethoven.
no, it has nothing to do. It's named after two dudes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but the Ludwig brothers, they eventually they were also percussionists at the time. We're starting to get around to the time period of moving pictures. Yes, the silent
Mm-hmm.
film era.
Yep.
So they're starting to come up with all kinds of different things because, in a lot of cases, you needed something to help convey the message of a silent film. They would come with sheet music. If you were lucky, a smaller community, you probably had some dude with a piano. Bigger cities, you probably had a small band, and your drummer
Mm-hmm.
was responsible for making the sound of the train pulling out of the station, the sound of the cowboy firing his six-shooter, or maybe a horse galloping along. And they did
Right.
have all kinds of fancy things. Oh, there's a very interesting. It's part of a series through the Vickforth Drumstick Company that really talks about that. But also, as a result, where we're seeing more and more of these, we're not playing with these big brass instruments that can really project. We're playing with a simple guitar, fiddles, much
Hmm.
quieter instruments compared to what a drum set can do, or early drum set at the time.
Which I want to just throw in there for a second is part of the reason that, yes, guitars at the time were like the small body classical stuff, but why guitars evolved in the way that they did. First off, with bigger sizes, like what I have here, this is the biggest standard acoustic size you can get unless you want to go something custom made. But also why electric guitars were made, which those are mine are sitting over there right now. Because again, it's all about you want to make yourself heard, you want to be louder.
Yeah, because ultimately speaking, a lot of string instruments and a lot of woodwind instruments cannot compete with a drummer playing with drumsticks.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, how drummers got around this in the early days before amplification, we started taking a look at some patents for some fly swatters, and we're like, you know what? I'm going to buy myself 2 fly swatters. And that's where we actually have the implements that I have in my hands right here.
Mm-hmm.
These are what are called brushes. You typically think of them in jazz.
Right. And a lot of acoustic sets use that too.
Yes. And it was done entirely until we could get that amplification, that extra projection to a lot of these other instruments. Then once
Mm-hmm.
that finally happens, we go back to our trusty drumsticks.
Exactly. And it's also interesting too to note that a lot of playing technique evolves too. Like for example, there was a time that you did not have any sort of extra implement to pluck a string. All you had was your 10 fingers, and you had like things. I know this, like, okay, so I'm not gonna do Stairway, that's too easy. I'm instead gonna do this one. But yeah, I know not very loud, but that's what you had. And then someone figured out, hey, let me take this rock or this tooth or whatever the first plectrum was, and let me pluck against a string, and that's more not just louder, but more accentuated than just see.
Yeah.
And that's where you get strumming from.
Mhm. And it's funny, it's ironic as well, because when we're forced to switch from this to this, we then started experimenting with what we could do, because a lot of times the drum heads back then, they were still made of calf or goat skin, and they had a
Mm-hmm.
texture to them. So they figured one day, drummer bored, it's rolling. He's just running it across his drum head there. It's like,
Real quick,
makes this sound.
can you get your mic a little bit closer to that? There you go.
That was probably the most awkward thing ever on planet Earth.
Just sound like you were brushing your teeth. Yeah. But yeah, and here's the thing. You can do that on other instruments too. Like for example, again, the guitar. It's not just for strumming. The box, being that it is hollow, is a naturally resonant percussion instrument. Like, and if you're rough, I'm not going to, but if you rough up an area here, you can get that brush stroke section. So I'm gonna do y'all a favor real quick. There's this one guitarist that he is, in my opinion, the best acoustic guitarist ever. And I'm going to show you a performance of him not just strumming the guitar, but drumming on it. and getting just about any percussion sound you want out of it. So this guy's name is Tommy Emmanuel, and like I said, he plays every inch of the guitar. He doesn't just play the strings. So I'm going to put that link in the chat right here for you. Give this guy a watch. Ian knows what's up. He says Tommy is the man. Yes, give this link a watch, and you will see him do some crazy stuff with an acoustic guitar. The same thing that I have right here. But consider this too. The videos do not do him justice. He is much better live, and I've seen him live twice. I think you'd like him, Ian. We should, or sorry, not well. You would like him, Ian, but Nate, I think you'd like him. We should go to a concert at some point. Me, you, and Ian. Well, the three of us.
Also, do I have to start wearing a name tag now if I'm going to get confused with Ian?
You've got a name tag built into your screen. How did I not see that?
Yeah, it's like, but nope, over right there.
Exactly. So yeah, music history just is as long and as diverse as human history is, and it's intertwined itself in other aspects of history too, like religious history, military history, social history, literally anything. So that's pretty much where we're going to wrap it up here. But yeah, here's the thing. Here's the crazy thing about music history in general. We went obviously way deeper than what we usually do for a standard beginner series type stream, and yet we still didn't even begin to scratch the surface. So the best thing that I would recommend, and Nate, I'm sure you've got your own take on this, but the best thing that I would recommend is just pick your favorite song and the genre that it's part of and just delve into that history. That's what I'm doing right now with heavy metal, and I'm kind of, broadcasting it here on YouTube, where right now I'm going through the catalog of Alice Cooper. So if you're a bluegrass fan, delve into the history of bluegrass. If you are a classical fan, delve into the history of classical. If you are an R&B fan, dive into that history. You don't have to learn absolutely everything unless you're like in college and you're trying to be a teacher, but pick what you like the best and then just learn as much as you can about it. You have anything to say about that, Nate?
Alternatively, I would say if you didn't want to go into a particular artist or a particular genre, if you have a particular favorite instrument, go into the history of it.
There you go.
I mean, just heck, covering the last century and a half of just the drum set is interesting enough, let alone you expand that to something like expand the full history of guitar across generations.
Oh, yeah. The history for this thing, as with many instruments, the history for this thing literally goes to the BC era. So yeah, guys, a lot of stuff to get into with music history. And I think this, by the way, this will not be the last time Nate and I get together on history. We kind of talked about this before, but I think we're going to go ahead and make it official. There's going to be, I don't know yet when, but there will be another not quite beginner series one day where we go into firearm history and things that go boom.
I feel like that one might have to be like a midday stream.
We'll see.
Out at a range with brass.
Yeah, if we get the setup, I would do it. I just don't. Well,
and 29 round magazines for YouTube compliance.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know that they would be okay with live streaming like Gunfire, but then again, if Demolition Ranch and Brandon Herrera and all them can make a YouTube career out of shooting guns, I'm sure there's a way I could do it.
Again,
but anyways,
it's with 29 round YouTube compliant.
Exactly. But yeah, gun history is, again, one of those aspects of history that is intertwined with just human history in general. And it will be definitely very, very fascinating to get into. In fact, Ian, if you're available whenever we figure this out, I definitely want to get you in on that stream too. Virginia says, I recommend just putting cartoon noises on the boom. So maybe a cartoon noise like this one here. There you go, Trevor. And Ian wants to be there, and Trent wants to be there too. Well, guys, like I said, we don't know yet when this is. I'm literally just now spur of the moment coming up with this idea. So we will, of course, be in talks to figure out when this is. But stay tuned for that. When I have more information, we will get in on this. But in the meantime, though, we are going to go ahead and shut it down. Virginia says speed whooper up, and it can be a pew 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 noise. That is true. And Trent says Scooby-Doo running for full auto.
Oh my, we're going to be playing with NFAs.
Anyways, though, we're going to go ahead and shut it down here. So thanks again, Nate, for coming along with me on this one. You are the music historian as far as I'm concerned. So this was good.
Alrighty. But I do know very little. I will say music history is probably not my most expansive area.
That's perfectly fine. So yeah, and just as a curiosity, guys, I know we've been covering beginner series as like different franchises, so like Dune or Warhammer 40K or things like that. But if there's an aspect of history that you want to see us dive into, let us know. In fact, put it in the comments of this. I'm going to put we're going to do it this way. I'm going to put a post in the community tab. If there is a specific aspect of history that you want to see us get into, drop it in the comments there and we'll do it. Like, for example, we're already thinking about doing firearm history. We could do military history. We could do cooking history. Virginia's recommending the Emu Wars. Yeah, that's another thing. We could go into specific moments in history, like World War II, Vietnam. Problem is, a lot of this we would have to do our absolute best to stay as neutral on as possible. So we'll have to, of course, use discretion with picking these. But whatever it is, whatever part of history, whatever type of history you want us to see us get in, we will absolutely do that. So with that, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And just remember, everyone, the Force is family.